Family ignored my welding dreams for years, as I refused to skip my exam for my golden brother. Mom called it selfish. I left, and never went back. When I was 16, I thought my family was just a little dramatic, not damaged, but loud, proud, and emotionally clumsy. But by the time I was 24, I realized that some families do not intentionally damage you. They aim. My name is Ethan, and I passed my welding certification exam last month. It took 7 years of odd jobs, late nights, and early mornings in community college to get there. 7 years of sweating through steel fumes and clutching flashcards until my hands were too weary to handle a coffee cup. And the night before my exam, the single most crucial day of my life, my mother approached me in the kitchen and said, "Your brother needs help moving his couch." I wish that was a joke. I did not grow up believing I was the invisible one. It merely started gradually, like a water leak beneath the floorboards. My older brother Liam was always the favored child. He was the child who had his name painted on the wall above his bed, along with a small football and 2 stars on either side. But I shared a room with peeling wallpaper and a bunk bed that groaned like it was demanding to be taken down. Liam was 4 years older than me, and always seemed to be 3 steps ahead. My parents had a backyard cookout for him shortly after he graduated from high school. When I made the dean's list my first semester, Mom looked at the email and said, "That's nice, honey. Can you take the trash out?" Liam didn't do much school. He moved between occupations like a leaf in the wind. Gym receptionist, then real estate, then something involving cryptocurrencies that never made sense, and finally accidentally maxing out his father's second credit card. Meanwhile, I worked weekend shifts at a scrapyard and studied during breaks because welding and sleeping were not my strong suits. I am not the brilliant kind. I'm the grinded out kind, who wakes up at 5 a.m. and learns by repetition. But in my house, Liam might breathe incorrectly and be complimented for his lung capacity. I might be bleeding from both hands and be asked why I was causing a mess. It wasn't entirely terrible, I suppose. My Nana, Dad's mother, was the only one who seemed to notice me. She used to nickname me Maze the Maker because I was always making things, even from leftovers. But she died when I was 17, and whatever little barrier I had against the family hierarchy disappeared with her. After that, I was simply the spare son, the assistant, the errand runner, the one who always had time, since having goals didn't count unless you wore a suit or talked about it on Instagram. And Liam moved into an extravagant apartment last year with his now ex-girlfriend, and when it failed, as it inevitably did, he chose to downsize to something more humble. That modest property was a duplex 26 minutes outside town, with a second-floor walk-up and a couch that appeared to weigh as much as his ego. He didn't mention anything until the night before my exam. I was sitting cross-legged on the carpet in the living room, my notes spread out like a temple dedicated to pipe angles and safety rules. He strolled in as if he still lived there. Although he had moved out, his aroma lingered in the home. Expensive cologne, and entitlement. "Yo, Maze," he shouted, flinging a rolled-up pair of socks at my leg as if we were 12 again. "No, tomorrow morning. Couch is a beast." I glanced at him. "Tomorrow is my welding test." He hesitated. "Oh, right. You're still doing that. Still doing that." I glanced over at my mother, who was preparing tea in the kitchen. She had not said anything yet. She did not even look at me. "I've been studying for months," I explained carefully, trying not to seem defensive. "I must arrive promptly at 8 a.m. This is the practical test." Liam grumbled. "Dude, it's only one morning. I am not asking for a kidney." Mom turned around and eventually set out. She didn't shout. Not yet. Her voice was kind. She used to pretend to be calm when she was about to do something bad. "Honey, your brother is attempting to construct a genuine life. He cannot accomplish anything on his own." My hands became chilly, and I am not. She didn't respond, just gave me that tired look as if I was being theatrical for attempting to place myself on the same playing field. Then she continued. "I just think you could reschedule or skip it. There'll be other tests." I chuckled. Actually laughed, not because it was amusing, but because it was unbelievable. I have already paid the price, and you cannot reschedule it for another 7 months. This is my shot. Mom pressed her mug down harder than required. "So you are saying no?" "I'm stating that I can't. I will not." And that's when the shouting began. She snapped like a rubber band that had been twisted too tightly. "He's attempting to create something for himself. You're just playing pretend with your small metal toys. Welding? Really? Do you believe that is a legitimate job? Do you believe that will take care of you?" Every part of me wished to shrink. However, something sharp began to rise in my chest. I stood up gently. And for once, I did not apologize. I did not beg to be understood. I scooped up my notes, passed by Liam, and went to my room. My father, as usual, remained mute and pretended to scroll on his phone in the corridor. That night, I didn't get much sleep. I maintained my thoughts. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should have just helped and rescheduled. But then I realized how many times I'd bent, said yes, and placed myself second so that Liam could be first, again and over. So I packed my belongings. Not all of them, but plenty. My boots, helmet, notes, and my favorite sweatshirt, which had burnt arms from that summer. I helped rewire a metal barn roof and then departed quietly. No speech, no drama, simply the front door closing at 2 a.m., and the sound of my old Civic starting up in the driveway. I slept in my car that night, and the next morning, I passed my welding exam. I imagined that would be the end of it. They'd ignore me as usual, pretend I was simply going through a phase, and wait for me to return with an apology and a wrench in hand. But that is not what occurred. I departed with more than just my backpack. I removed the final thread that held their sense of normalcy together, and without me to hold it all together, their entire little house of cards began to disintegrate. But I didn't realize it yet. Not then. I was simply a guy with a certification, a sleeping bag, and years of suppressed wrath. Anger that was finally beginning to show fangs. For the following several days after passing my welding exam, I was caught in a strange limbo between tiredness and pride. I had not told anybody at home. There was no text to Mom, no call to Liam, not even a "hey, I passed." It felt too important to discuss with people who would simply roll their eyes or nod nicely and ask if I'd considered pursuing a business degree. I basically stayed to myself, crashing on a friend's old couch, nursing coffee like it was fluid, and wondering for the first time in years whether, just maybe, I might have a true life that belonged to me. I expected them to try to contact me, or at least make a little effort to appear concerned. But there was no radio, not even a thumbs-up emoji from Dad, which, as you know, is how my father communicates. The only ping I received was from Liam. 2 days later. Didn't expect you to actually flake. Nice. There was no question about the exam. No acknowledgement of what I've been working on for years. Just that. I did not react. A week later, the guilt campaign started. It all started with a text from Mom. "You've made your point. Could you please stop punishing your family for loving you?" I gazed at the message for a minute before putting my phone down without responding. I'm loving myself. That's what it was. Screaming at me for putting my future first, rejecting my whole professional path as fictitious. They had an amusing way of expressing affection, and I quickly became bored of justifying myself to folks who never listened. But I should have known that quiet would not be enough. The next morning, I received a call from Aunt Claire, Mom's sister. We weren't close, but she was always nice to me in a distant, smile at Thanksgiving sort of manner. So when I picked up, I expected to make small conversation. Instead, she sighed loudly and continued. "Ethan, I just got off the phone with your mom. What is going on?" I blinked, sat up taller. "What do you mean what's going on?" "She's in tears, says, you've gone completely off the rails. She said you cursed her out and stormed out in the middle of the night." "Ethan, you know she's been through a lot lately. You can't just abandon your family." I wasn't expecting that. I actually laughed. "What?" "That's what she said." Claire said. "That you're having a rebellious episode. That you're staying with strangers and refusing to return home." Strangers? I've been living with Ryan, my best buddy since middle school. His sofa had more family significance than half the embraces I ever received growing up. "She's lying," I remarked, my voice cold. I didn't swear at anybody. I just informed them I couldn't bypass my welding certification. Then she yelled that I was not creating a true life. So I departed gently. There was a prolonged pause. Then Claire cleared her throat. "Well, that's not what she told the rest of us." And that's when it clicked. They weren't simply attempting to shame me into returning. They were attempting to change the tale to make me the unstable character, the ungrateful son who rushed away, rather than the one who eventually stood up for himself. And in that version of the narrative, Liam remained the hero, the one who tried and needed help, while I was the one who inflicted suffering. I swiftly stopped the conversation after that. I wasn't harsh, but I didn't sugarcoat anything either. Aunt Claire didn't say anything in response. I could see she did not want to get involved. 2 days later, Liam shared a picture on Facebook. "Big thanks to all the real ones who showed up and helped me move. Appreciate the love." In the shot, he's standing next to 2 of his gym mates, smiling as if he just got a movie contract. Mom said, "So proud of you, sweetie. Starting your new life with integrity and grace." Grace. Integrity. That was it. That was the exact moment I felt it. The snapping point. Nor wrath, nor even grief, but a profound bone-level clarity. They were never going to comprehend. Even worse, they didn't want to. They enjoyed the tale of me being the bitter failure who was too obstinate to see how fortunate I was. It was cleaner and simpler to stomach. But I was not going to play along. That week I began making moves. Ryan introduced me to a person he knew at a fabrication firm across town. It wasn't spectacular, but the compensation was adequate, and they need welders who understood what they were doing. I arrived with my certification in hand and a fire in my belly. The foreman shook my hand, examined my sleeve burns and stated, "You'll fit right in." It was not glamorous. I burnt through my gloves quicker than I could replace them. By day 3 my boots smelled like molten metal, and my lunch breaks consisted of 10 minutes of stillness in a gravel parking lot. But for the first time in years, I was not faking. I was working on something, earning money, but yet receiving nothing from home. No congratulations. No, how about the job? Just quiet. Except for the rare communication from Mom, which reads like passive-aggressive greeting cards. Family isn't supposed to be this hard. You used to have such a kind heart. Don't let strangers turn you against your blood. Family is life. They loved that word when it fit them. Then I received an unexpected phone call. I was 4 weeks into my new work when Dad called. He called, not texted, and said, "We need to talk in person." I hesitated, but something in his voice seemed strange, so I accepted. We met in a diner midway between my apartment and theirs. I arrived wearing my work boots and a hoodie I hadn't cleaned in 3 days. He walked in wearing his old jacket and appeared to have not slept. We sat. The hush was heavy. Then he continued. "Your brother got fired." I said nothing. He made some stupid decisions with the crypto nonsense. He spent more than he made. His lease went through. He needs somewhere to stay. I gazed at him. Dad looked uneasy as he said, "Okay. Your mother and I were hoping he could move back into the house for a while, just until he gets back on his feet." I nearly laughed again. "That's fine. It's your house." Dad scratched his temples. "Thing is, we were hoping you could move back too. Help out with bills, chip in." There was a sign. The actual cause. They asked me to bankroll Liam's return tour. I slumped back into the booth. "Let me get things straight. He blew his rent, lost his job, and now you want me to assist pay the mortgage while he sleeps in his old bed and runs a business in the living room." Dad did not respond. "I just got certified. I'm finally working. I have a shot at something, and you want me to give that up for him? He's your brother. He claimed he needed us." I looked him full in the eyes and responded. "So did I." Then I stood up and went. I did not weep. Not in the automobile. Not going back to Ryan's. But something inside me eventually relaxed. A choice. A turning point. I was done asking to be noticed. I'm done auditioning for a position I'll never get. But just when I thought the worst was past, and the ridiculousness had peaked, something occurred. The treachery. It was delivered in the form of a letter, not an email or a text message. When I arrived home from work one evening, Ryan gave it to me with furrowed eyebrows. "Looks official," he remarked. "From your parents." I opened it with grease-stained hands. Inside was an official notification, not legal but near. A prepared note on letterhead that basically read, "We've decided it's time to make some financial changes. Because Liam is in transition, we've enabled him to sublease your previous room. Please communicate directly with him to obtain your remaining stuff. Any things left unclaimed at the end of the month will be deemed forfeited." I reread it 3 times. They gave Liam my room without asking or saying anything. The cherry on top was Liam's signature at the bottom of the letter, which was simply written in blue ink as if it were a business transaction. I didn't enter Ryan's residence that night. Not straight away. I remained on his porch for perhaps 20 minutes, gazing at the letter, reading and rereading it, trying to persuade myself that I had misread something. Perhaps it was a joke, a prank, or a strange way of summoning me back home. But it wasn't. It was authentic, typed, signed, and mailed with intent. They gave Liam my room. They removed me again, as if I were a placeholder until their actual kid was back on track. I stepped down to the curb and sat on the side of the pavement, arms on my knees, a letter crumpled in my hand. That's when I discovered it was already crumpled down the center, folded neatly and purposefully, indicating that someone, most likely my mother, sat down at a table, wrote it all out, and folded it like she was delivering a wedding invitation. There was no indecision or conflict, just a simple rejection. That was my rock bottom. Not the letter, Not even the room. It was understanding I was so simple to take out that they didn't even try to lessen the impact by lying. They did not say temporary. They didn't say, "We hope you understand." Instead, they used the word forfeited, as if my life were a parcel left on their porch for too long. Returning to cinder. I didn't tell Ryan that night. I simply nodded when he asked if I was okay and walked into the guest room. I lay on the pull-out, turned toward the wall and let the weight of everything drop on top of me as if the ceiling had collapsed. Over the next few days I didn't say much. I went to work, welded whatever was necessary and kept my head down. I didn't discuss the letter or bring up Liam. I believe Ryan felt something was awry. He's the type of friend who understands when to back off. But I could feel myself shrinking, as if I were changing into someone else, quieter, numb. However, one night, I snapped a little. We were watching TV, some idiotic cookery show, when the presenter said something like, "You've got to know your worth before anyone else does." I murmured without thinking. "Unless your family convinces you it's zero." Ryan turned off the TV. "Okay," he said, not rudely. "Tell me what happened." And I did. I told him everything. The quarrel before the exam, the stillness that followed, the guilt texts, the Facebook post, the dinner chat with my father, and eventually the letter. He did not say anything straight immediately, but stared at me for a long time. Then he said something that I will never forget. "Maze, they're not your family. Not anymore. They're your origin story." It slammed me like a steel beam in the chest because he was correct. I'd spent years believing I was a flawed piece of the puzzle, attempting to shove myself into a spot that was never intended for me. But perhaps the aim was not to fit. Perhaps the goal was to make my own dang table. The next morning I asked my foreman if I might work extra shifts. I informed him that I needed the hours. He glanced at me, smiled and said, "You're not going to sleep for a month, kid? You sure?" I agreed. "Yeah, I'm sure." That month, I worked more than ever before. Early mornings, late nights, and weekends. I took any junk shift that no one wanted. I welded through blisters, missed lunch breaks, and immersed myself in the task as if I were trying to get the pain out of my system. And gradually, silently, it began to assist. The buzzing in my mind diminished. My chest discomfort became less intense. I was still furious and sad, but I was also moving. And then, approximately 5 weeks into the grind, something unexpected occurred. I was promoted. Not formally. No title. No increase yet. But the foreman began pairing me with the fresher men, having me examine their joints, teach them how to adjust their arcs, and provide feedback without yelling commands. At first I assumed it was a coincidence, but then he grabbed me aside and said, "You've got an eye, Ethan, and you've got patience. That's rare." I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. Later that week, I purchased a new set of gear, including high-end gloves, a new helmet, and a set of bespoke earplugs tailored to my ears. Sure, it felt luxurious, but for the first time in a long time I felt valued. And then something crazy happened. I have my own place. It was a modest studio, about the size of a garage, but it had a functioning heater, good water pressure, and a window that looked out into a scrapyard where the sun caught the rusty metal just perfectly in the morning. The landlord was mellow, didn't ask too many questions, and let me sign a month-to-month lease. I recall standing in the middle of that studio on move-in day. Just myself, a twin mattress and a folding table, and I'm feeling a wave of peaceful tranquility. I had nothing, yet it was mine. I didn't post about it or publicize it to the world. I just started creating a life slowly and silently, one bolt at a time. Of course, there were some difficult moments. One night I stopped at a gas station and noticed my mother filling up her car at the next pump. She didn't notice me, and if she did, she pretended not to. I looked at her for a second. She wore the same weary coat and unkempt bun while cleaning the home. And for a little while, I felt the familiar need to approach and say something, to inquire as to why and how. But I did not. I let her drive away without saying a thing. Because by then, I'd learned something significant. Closure isn't always a door that somebody else unlocks. Sometimes you're standing alone and deciding not to knock. Ryan dropped by over the weekend with a housewarming present. He described a beat-up microwave and a plastic plant that appeared to have survived a battle. We sat on the floor, eating microwave burritos. I eventually informed him about my idea. I want to start something on my own. Not huge currently, but perhaps mobile welding, bespoke metal work, and repairs. He grinned. Maze the maker back at it. Maybe. Over the following few weeks, I researched small company permissions, mobile rigs, and equipment pricing. It was not easy. After paying rent and food, I hardly had enough money to save anything. But I started saving money steadily, dollar by dollar. Then came the call from Liam. There was no caller ID, just a voice that I hadn't heard in weeks. "Ethan, I haven't said anything." He went on. "Look, I know things got weird, but I wanted to talk, maybe clear the air." I should have hung up, but something inside me wanted to see what excuse he'd come up with this time. "You know how Mom is," he continued, laughing. "She freaks out. It's all intense. I did not intend for you to lose your room. That was not my idea." "Have you signed the letter?" I asked plainly. He paused. "I mean, absolutely, but only because she stated you didn't care and wouldn't return." "She lied," I said. "And you contributed." He became silent. Then, in a quieter tone, he said, "I'm trying, man. I really am. I got a new job. It's remote but decent pay. Trying to clean things up." I didn't respond. At last he said, "I miss having a brother. And maybe once I would have cracked, would have reached across the void and tried to fix things, but not now. Not this version of me." I hang up. No wrath, no speech, only stillness. Because it was the true power I possessed now. I didn't need them. Not for validation, shelter, or purpose. I had created something from nothing. Just myself, a pair of gloves, and a back that never stopped hurting. And this was merely the beginning. Because while they were still pretending and playing home with their broken deck of cards, I was ready to begin stacking actual bricks. When I was finished, they'd know about it. But it's not from me. By the time October arrived and the morning frost began to bite, I had established my own pattern. Wake up at 6, have a fast coffee, weld till my back felt like a steel beam, return home to my little studio, eat whatever Ryan insisted on putting in my fridge, and fall asleep watching YouTube videos on welding rigs, tool storage, and small company taxes. I'd become obsessed, not in a desperate way, but in a focused, sharp way, as if my previous life was attempting to suffocate me, and now I finally had space to breathe. However, after you start breathing again, you will be able to think clearly. And once I did, the setup began. It began with a notepad, a simple spiral-bound item I picked up at the dollar shop on a whim. I opened it up on my workbench one night and scrawled 4 words across the first page in strong black marker. "They believe I'm gone," because that's what it all came down to. My parents, Liam, had erased me. Not out of wrath, but as if it were a filing error. A row that is silently deleted. They believed I was a ghost in a flannel hoodie who would vanish and never be heard from again, and this assumption was going to cost them. But I didn't want retribution based on pettiness, like a social media post or a family text feud. No, I wanted something clean, something planned, a retribution that seemed to be successful, sounded like stillness, and felt like a guy rebuilding his own life brick by brick while they sat there wondering why the home kept growing colder. So I devised a strategy. Page 1 of that notebook contained my objective. The following 30 minutes were spent going over steps, contacts, quotations, drawings, and timeframes. I had never been a planner before. Always the person who worked hard and thought everything would work out. But now, I was in surgery. The objective is to develop a mobile welding firm by spring. Not showy, not large, simply genuine and sustainable. The first step was to find a reliable rig. My Civic was ideal for short journeys, but I wanted something that could handle metal, gas tanks, and tools without throwing a rod. Ryan assisted me in scouring listings every weekend. We even went to an hour-away mechanic who was selling an ancient Ford F-250 that was bashed up and corroded at the base but had a strong engine and a reinforced bed. I stood in front of it, arms crossed, and asked, "Will it get me to work without killing me on the freeway?" The mechanic, a guy named Roland with a cigarette behind each ear, nodded and said, "Kid, this truck is uglier than my first divorce, but it'll outlive us both." Sold. I drained half my savings on it, but it felt right, like planting roots in motion. I spent the following 2 weekends cleaning it out, polishing the frame, painting it matte black, and putting in a set of used racks for my welding tanks and toolboxes. Ryan, who had become a cheerleader and co-founder, assisted me in branding it. We drew up a logo one night over beers, something basic, yet striking. "Ethan works with metal." "That sounds legitimate," he said. "Sounds like a guy who doesn't live on a futon anymore," I told him. We both laughed. But there was a spark beneath my ribs that had never been there before. Something new. Pride. Step 2. Obtain a license. I won't get into the dull specifics, but between permit offices, company insurance, EIN registration, and safety compliance paperwork. I felt like I was swimming in red tape for a month. I'd work full shifts, get home, and then spend 3 hours immersed in forms and how-to instructions. But as I dug deeper, I became more determined. It wasn't simply about starting a business anymore. It was about becoming unmistakable. Nobody could accuse me of pretending. Step 3 was more personal. And this is where the true arrangement began to take shape. I understood that if I ever wanted genuine closure, I needed to tackle the source rather than ignore or outgrow it. So I went home, not to discuss or cry, but simply to get what was mine. I wrote Liam a polite but stern text message. Nothing big, just, "Hey, I'll be by this weekend to pick up my remaining items. Please don't touch them." He said, "Sure, whatever's left is in the basement." The basement? Not even my old room. Of course. Saturday arrived. I pulled up in my pickup, parked halfway down the street and strolled up the driveway, gloves in my back pocket and my pulse racing like a war drum. The home had not altered. The same damaged mailbox and plastic flamingo remained in the flower garden. It was smaller than I recalled, less like a fortress and more like a prison. Liam opened the door in gym shorts and a tank top, as if he had not aged a day. He nodded as if we were still youngsters in the backyard, tossing rocks at the fence. I did not return it. "You may go around back," he added, pointing to the garage. "Stuff around the water heater." I did not say anything and went by him. The basement smelled like mold and old memories. My boxes were there, dusty and crumpled at the edges, one of them partly open with a pair of my boots thrown on top like garbage. I went through them gently. My helmet, my first pair of gloves, a photo of me and Nana with the edges curled, a notebook full of welding schematics from trade school, and other items they presumably assumed I didn't care about. I placed everything into cartons I took from the truck, taped them, labeled them, and stacked them neatly. Nobody came down to chat the entire time. I could hear the TV upstairs and Mom laughing in the background, but no one recognized my presence, which was okay since I did one final thing before leaving. I pulled out a little envelope from my pocket, printed on heavy card material and beautifully embossed with my logo and new business name. A basic one-page leaflet contained information on mobile welding services, the debut date, the services supplied, and contact information. I slipped it into the kitchen's rubbish drawer, next to the extra scissors and expired coupons. Let them discover it. Allow them to sit with it. A few days later, the calls started. First it was my aunt again. "Sweetheart, I noticed your company ad on Facebook, which your mother placed. Congratulations." I blinked. "She posted it?" she asked, expressing her pride in your business drive. I almost dropped the phone. Not a word to me. Just a proud Facebook post. A couple more days passed before I received a text from my father. "Here's a snapshot of my truck parked outside a job location. The logo gleams with the phrase, 'Looks good.' Your grandfather would have liked this." There was no apology. But it didn't have to, because the following arrangement took the shape of a contract. One of my former co-workers, Raul, a senior welder, approached me about a subcontracting opportunity. He said he appreciated my work ethic, and his cousin owned a construction company that needed metalwork done for a new home development on the west side. "Cash flow is solid," he stated, "and your name appears on the invoice." I met the cousin. We shook hands and agreed on the scope and price. That night I signed my first genuine contract with Ethan Works Metal. When the check cleared, I photographed and printed it. I didn't send it or even wave it around. I merely pinned it to my workstation, next to the crumpled letter from my parents. One piece of paper read "forfeited," the other replied they had paid in full. I didn't intend to get engaged in the neighborhood association effort. Not at first. I just wanted to weld, construct stuff, and expand my customer list. But life has a weird way of silently plotting your retribution while you're busy reconstructing your life from the bottom up. It began with a woman named Beth. She was in her late 50s and led the local neighborhood organization for the Oakview Expansion Project, a middle-class suburban development on the outskirts of town. Her husband had noticed my vehicle at a job site, taken a picture of the emblem, and given her my phone number. She phoned me the next day. "We're looking for someone to fabricate custom railings for 20 new units," she told me, "and possibly assist with some gate restoration on the older properties. Your name came up, you come highly recommended." I thought I'd dropped the phone. It wasn't merely a massive task, this was a public job. High exposure, constant employment, and a contract that not only paid my rent 6 months in advance, but also provided me with something more important: credibility. I met her on site, gave her my pitch, and showed her images of past work, credentials, and insurance. I was scared, over-prepared and sweating, but she nodded, went through my folder and said, "You're the first guy we've met who actually came prepared. The board votes next week. but I'd say you're in good shape. I received the contract 2 days later, and then the cosmos did its thing. 4 weeks into the endeavor, I drove into the area early to get a jumpstart. I had barely finished unloading steel rods when a familiar voice echoed over the cul-de-sac. "Wait, Ethan." I turned slowly. There she was. Mom's hair was nicely curled, her Starbucks cup in hand, and she was wearing the same smug look she usually had when speaking to people she needed to impress. She was walking a little white dog on a pink leash, which she used to claim she despised. And next to her, Liam was dressed in joggers and sunglasses despite the fact that it was cloudy. I did not flinch, instead wiping my hands on a cloth and nodding. "Hey." She blinked, as if she had seen a ghost. "What are you doing here?" "I currently oversee metal fabrication at Oakview." I answered, indicating to the railing behind me. "Custom installations, gate repair, that type of stuff." Liam blinked. "Wait, this is your company?" I smiled slightly. "Yeah, Ethan Works Metal. You might have heard of it." Their faces were priceless. Turns out they just moved into Oakview. Apparently after Liam's cryptocurrency thing imploded and his rebound job fell through, they scraped together enough to co-sign a unit together, one of the pre-furnished townhomes built during the first expansion. "Wow," Mom said after a pause. "Good for you, sweetie." "Sweetie," I nodded. "Appreciate it." Then I went back to work. But something about that run-in stuck in my head. Not because I wanted to impress them, not anymore, but because I saw something behind their eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Over the next few weeks, the Oakview job became my second home, and the residents loved me. I showed up early, did the work cleanly, and didn't cut corners. Word spread, and I began getting calls from people outside the association asking about custom furniture, signage, and sculpture work. Beth called me one afternoon and said, "Hey, the board wants to recognize you at the quarterly meeting. You've had a big influence on the area. Could you please pop by and say something?" I agreed. I donned my finest shirt, clean pants, and carried a photo slideshow of before and after projects on my iPad. The meeting was held at the neighborhood clubhouse, where they hosted family barbecues and wine evenings. About 40 people attended, including Mom and Liam. They sat near the back, and I didn't look at them once. Beth introduced me, and I spoke for 5 minutes about how I got into welding, what I like about it, and how grateful I was to be able to work in a community that values craftsmanship. When I finished, they all clapped, including Mom. Beth then pulled me aside during mingling and refreshments. She said, "A couple of the older apartments here are still officially under the initial HOA management business. They are a bit of a mess. Late on repairs and behind on paperwork. It is slowing us down. But next quarter, we'll vote on merging the board and bringing everything under one administration, so we'll be searching for a new maintenance and fabrication lead for the entire subdivision." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of land to cover." She grinned. "You'd be well compensated. And you'd have authority over all property maintenance, including who gets prioritized, who gets skipped, and what gets postponed." I understood right away. Liam and Mom's flat was in the old block, and I kept my face neutral. I'd be honored. The vote passed a month later, and I was the man they had to call for help. Within a week, the first request came in. A service ticket from their address, a loose stair railing, a potential safety hazard. I marked it as received, then let it sit for 4 weeks. They sent follow-ups. Polite at first, then urgent. "Please advise. We have some elderly folks visiting. Stairs are still unsteady. This is a safety problem." Liam even called my work number, which I did not answer. When Beth eventually inquired about the delay, I told her the truth. "I'll get to it, but I have a backlog. Residents who have supported the work from the beginning will be given priority." She just nodded. "Makes sense." I eventually went, took my time, arrived late, made a lot of noise, drilled slowly and loudly, and left metal shavings in the walkway. I still did good work, but there was no small talk, no eye contact, just work. Cold, clean, and professional. When I finished, I handed Mom the invoice, full price, no discount. Before I turned to leave, I remarked, "By the way, your faucet's leaking upstairs." She blinked. "What? Second floor?" "I heard it while working. Might want to correct that." She started to speak, but I was already walking away, and that's when I realized they got it. Not just the message, but the whole image. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't thrown a tantrum, written a Facebook post, or called the family together for some big dramatic reckoning. Instead, I'd done something worse. I'd succeeded without them, built something they couldn't touch, dismiss, or take credit for, and now they had to live in it. Every railing, gate, and polished weld they passed on the way to their car. I was there. I would always be there. But not for them, just around them, like a shadow they couldn't shake. Months later, Ryan and I sat outside my shop. Yes, my shop, because I'd finally rented a small warehouse on the outskirts of town. The business was steady. I had 2 part-time guys working weekends. I had a waiting list, and most importantly, I had peace. "Did you imagine you'd go this far?" he inquired, cracking open a Pepsi. I glanced about at the truck, the shop, the stillness, and grinned. "No," I answered. "But I knew I'd leave them behind." And that's exactly what I did. They attempted to bury me, but I wasn't gone.